How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, a horror video game podcast and proud member of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we're pointing and clicking through the pixelated folk horrors of Carnival from developer Beyond Booleans. Set in 1930s Venice, Italy, in which English reporter James Maynard has been assigned the less than titillating story of a road bridge connecting the outside world to this ancient and secretive city, embroiled in local customs, budding political strife, and possibly nefarious activities occurring just below the surface. We interviewed the developer Beyond Booleans last week and got to get a lot of great insight into not only the developers' sort of background and their influences and their process to coming to games. Somebody that we've been a fan of for a while now, covering Teeth of Glass and The Anchorite for Horror Bites. And so this is actually his second full release. The original one was Abscission, which I have yet to play, but after our chat with him and certainly getting to play Carnival, it's great to just see like a developer that can mesh and mold their storytelling capabilities and techniques from like a smaller bite size of horror into an experience like Carnival, which is, it took me, I think 2.5, 3 hours. And really just getting to see that creativity kind of like flourish a little bit more, have a little bit more room to breathe, if you will.
Yeah, that's it. And we always say it's great when we see that sort of pipeline from Horror Bites developer to, getting games covered on like the main episodes like this, because they've made something bigger. And it's a good thing as always to see how a developer sort of moves from project to project and like what they do with that. And we've seen with a few that our favorites that they all go in very different directions and have different approaches, and some are more experimental, like trying lots of different things and little in small form, and some take the core ideas and push them further and further and further. And here is an example of that, where Carnival is basically it's as full fat as you get from the ideas we had for stuff like Teeth of Glass, which was like a 2-screen point and click effectively, done on very short, which for the genre is not usual. So this is more of a closer to traditional length sort of point and click game like that, which but still like on the briefish side, I suppose is the best way to put it, but still manages to fit in so much. And that was the great thing about Teeth of Glass especially, was that even in that small space there was so much world building and storytelling done in this like very short like chunk, and so there's proof here that this is a game that gets to expand on that sort of repertoire, show that sort of writing class that as you said last week, he's been writing for a long time, and about certain things in particular, and this was a long-term sort of idea, and it's great to see that and sort of out in the open.
Yeah, and I think for me, what was also really great to see was getting to see a story that gets to unfold, but naturally, like as it unfolds, you get to explore more of the world with which it's happening. And so,
Yeah.
it's not the type of thing where you're going to take Venice as the setting, and then like the city is so integral to the story that to make a smaller experience that only lets you explore like a surface level examination of that city is not really going to do utilizing that setting justice, right? So you need to
Mm.
have an experience that's a little bit larger, but also like in the size of this experience, it affords this type of game to let you, travel around the city in different aspects of locations and whatnot. And so you have this like map basically that allows you to then explore different bits and bobs, nooks and crannies, get to find and interact with different characters that are tied to each location. And, being a journalist for the protagonist, like he does a really great job, I think, of putting you into the shoes of somebody that's being dropped into, that familiar situation of a stranger in a strange land. And you just get to meet all the different players that are in this world. And, you know, I don't necessarily know much about Venice, and I don't know much about the culture there. So, getting to go on this journey with James Maynard and just get to like be completely lost in this place, but at the same time, like really intrigued by the notions of customs and the little sort of like breadcrumbs that you're getting about the city, about the time of year, and about just what the hell Carnival is.
Yeah, and you have obviously this historical backdrop of Mussolini and what's going on there. And as you sort of alluded to there, Venice's history, and this bridge is basically going to connect them to the mainland in a way that only the train does at this point. And as a result, that's a big change for the people of Venice, and that's what James becomes very curious of. In writing about this bridge, he wants to know how people feel and what it means to them. And very early on, he gets responses that are very straightforward and saying, we don't really want that to happen. It's like these are people who've lived here all their life and want life to kind of stay the same, which is culturally a thing that many people can relate to. I imagine where you do that. You get used to your community being a certain way, and things change in some significant way, whether it be a land bridge or a building or whatever. And yeah, there's going to be pushback. And yet that approach to it in this game isn't all about that. It's not like it's not the yokels out to pitchfork anyone outsiders sort of thing. So it's just kind of witnessing what that culture is before it kind of gets destabilized, in a way, by this big change. Like it's like, yeah, in video game terms, you think about what like Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 sort of mean for like the death of the old West, an old way of life, and how you're witnessing the end of that, before like everything changes for good and for worse. Like that. It's kind of that kind of snapshot, I suppose, that you are just at this particular point in history, and you have obviously the knowledge of where certain things will go, with Italy in the next few years as well. So yeah, there's an interesting sort of dynamic going on in that regard on several levels already as a good hook. And that's before you even get to like the witch and the folk horror stuff that's going to go on.
That's the thing. Like, I think that the best examples of folk horror are the ones that are not always just concerned with, you being stranded somewhere, right? You can have folk horror that has a protagonist that's drawn to an area, not just because of like disappearances or strange shit that's been reported happening.
Yeah.
This felt like a very sort of organic introduction to the world of Carnival in that, he's there for this journalistic pursuit. And also the thing that I really liked about this was, and sort of what I was just saying, like he's not trapped there. And
No.
Even to a point, you have an option of like, do I want to keep going down this rabbit hole or do I want to think about leaving? And so what I really appreciated about this was that, as a journalist, he's there and he's intrigued because of the nature of like, yeah, it's not an exciting story, but I'm going to meet people and I'm going to gain some knowledge about them because I have this story to write. And it's not just, oh, I got driven out here by a taxi or a train, and then you go to catch the train or the taxi home, and then it never shows up, right? That kind of very standard
Yeah.
trope of a lot of folk horror. And here it's more about engaging with the culture and the history, and then you're applying the more supernatural elements of the game. And now, naturally, something is afoot because it's a folk horror game. Um, but I like that it's not too heavy-handed in the first half of the experience, which I think is a really smart handle on it. And if anything, the sort of tension, I suppose, is stemming from an aspect of James Maynard's character, which is that he has narcolepsy, and so he's
Mm.
prone to basically these like blackouts, right? And so that's one of the first instances where you're dealing with like, oh, okay, well, is this a reliable narrator? Is he not? You have that, and there's like almost this little mini game that you play sometimes at the end of each day where he needs to remember something, and so he has like cards that have images tied to them that kind of like give him a refresher. So I liked that the intrigue mostly stemmed from the non-supernatural aspects of the story early on, which is the hook, and then they start layering on those genre elements in a way that just like makes you go further down the rabbit hole in this investigation.
Yeah, we talked a bit recently about like genre tropes and styles and certain expectations that come with certain genres, and with this one, as you said, folk horror, the way things go and how you end up stuck there are usually the way they go. And here it is just literally down to journalistic curiosity, like that, which, one of the best things about that is to find out a story, and finding out you don't know what that story is until you kind of talk to people and like unearth their little bits and bobs. So I think the fact that's done quite innocently, as well, and the fact that it leads to places that aren't so innocent is immediately like a great sort of subversion of that sort of idea. And as you said, not being stuck there and it just being natural curiosity and journalistic curiosity that sort of drive him and you really into sort of investigating further in that way, rather than just because, oh my god, I got to find this person or whatever, as you said. These are all really refreshing ways to go about it, and it helps that story immensely, I think, as well, because it fits so well with the character. And then, as you said, you have the narcolepsy thing, which throws this spanner in the works, and it isn't because of something that's going on necessarily in Venice that's causing it. It isn't someone else doing it to him. It's just this is something he's lived with, and he's terribly British and apologetic about it without making too much of a fuss. But it is like also conveyed as being this frustrating sort of discombobulating problem at times, in terms of having to sort of recollect, like you can sense the inconvenience of it happening, each time. It's like almost, again, in that very sort of stiff upper lip way of like, okay, well, I've got to deal with that sort of thing. And I think the first time that happens, where he awakens in his room, like when he arrives, and has no memory where he is for that temporary period. I mean, it's a great establishment of his memory problems and his narcolepsy, plus it, the first time you kind of get an idea of how the game's puzzles will work as well. So it's a great way to sort of introduce things on a narrative and a gameplay sense all in one go. And there's several elements like that, several points in the game like that. But straight away, that was like, in building out this character and making all these things about him so key to where the story goes and how the story goes, is something you don't get that often, I think, in video game writing, especially. So, and a lot of folk horror media. So, I think you mentioned something about Kill List, didn't you, last week? It's like there's like where you get in. I mean, that's the more violent way of doing it, but there was something again where it was never on the cards. There was no any reason they were really getting into that path, but it just so happened to be part of this wider path. And two worlds collide that never really should have, and in a way that's not the usual. So yeah, in that sense, it's very much like that. But yeah, that's a great way to build the character.
Yeah, and it was really fascinating getting to talk to uh, Jake about his background and just like getting to it became, it's apparent from the outset of not only Carnival, but when you play his other, the horror bite experiences that we've played is that, writing is an inherent strength of his. So to learn that like he's written novels and things like that and novellas, which, as he said in the interview, the story for Carnival stemmed from a novella that he wrote years ago. And, it's one of those things when, we've been on and on about point and click horror games now, it seems for like a month plus, but for good reason, because
Yeah.
a lot of the times the ones that we're covering, part of the reason why they're so standout is because of the quality of their writing, obviously, which,
Yeah.
there definitely been point and click games, whether they're adventure or horror, that I've played where it's like, oh, like this is more humor focused or this is more complex puzzle focused. But with something like Carnival, the narrative is so strong, and what I believe some of the characters that ended up in the game were added after he had written the novella. I hope I got that right
Mm.
from our interview with him. But like the fact that you could write a story and then, however many years it was ago, and then you're adding a character to it, and, none of the characters that James meets and is interviewing and whatnot, none of them feel like they kind of just appear out of nowhere, right? There's this very
No.
much like a cohesion and a drive behind each of the characters that make them distinguishable and unique, other than the close-up artwork of them, which we can talk about in a little bit. But to have such a budding cast of characters, each with a different background and motivation, and potential, sinisterness to them, like that was one of those aspects of the cast and the writing that I was just so impressed with from start to finish. Not only the descriptions of the environments or, James's own inner monologue, but also just these characters that, um, all have this, as I said, this like budding personality, and that comes through in their writing and their temperament. So it's a good assortment of characters that avoid ever feeling entirely caricature in the sense of like the blatant red herring, if you will, that's in plenty of folk horror and things like that. Like it was a good assortment of characters, and I don't think early on anybody comes on like too strong as, oh, this is the guy that in the next 2 hours is going to like be a turncoat basically or anything like that. Just a good assortment of characters, I think.
Yeah, and it again ties into this idea of this place being almost closed off from the rest of Italy in so many ways. It gives you sort of scope to make them all fit a certain type without being all similar. And it all boils down to that sort of worldview, and how limited it is, not just by where they live, but also by the time period and the technology that isn't there to really connect them to the rest of the, well, not just the rest of Italy, but like the world in general. So yeah, they're not unaware as well. They're not, like I said, they're not painted as yokels, like that don't understand anything that's going on outside. They look at it with indifference in a lot of cases and just go, "Oh, that's Italy's problem, not our problem," sort of thing. But yeah, I do think that the setting and in terms of time and place definitely help. The idea that you could just like put characters in and out of that, and they work as long as you keep to those rule sets and understand. And like we've discussed about James himself, everything's kind of laid out in a way that means that yes, that all these characters are designed and written with that in mind and with this place in mind.
Absolutely. So I'm curious for you, like when we get into talking about or like the puzzles and whatnot, right? Because that is, after all, a lot of the bread and butter of a point and click horror game. How did you find that the puzzles were handled here? And do you find that like overall it provided the right level of challenge, maybe enough challenge? Did they find did you find them to be fitting within this world? What was your kind of takeaway from those?
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about the Drifter, I know we keep bringing it up, but it being such a modernization of point and click in itself, yeah, there was a lot of streamlining done to make sure things were sensible and logical and cohesive with what was going on, so that the pace would keep on. Now, this is a short game, even by the Drifter standards, so you got to have puzzles that aren't going to stump you to death, and really drain the pace away of what you've got. This isn't like a super rapid pace game or anything, but it's going along at a decent rate, and there's a flow to it that would definitely be interrupted if the puzzles were going to get in the way. Now, there's enough challenge there, and if you're a point and click aficionado, some of it's going to be you kind of will get how they work anyway, just because of the way point and click games work. But they're definitely not as obtuse as the classical examples, which is always a bugbear when you think of how that works. I think there's a bit more logic to it. Again, when we think of everything in this world, and especially once you finish the game, you think back to a lot how it's been planned out and done, and it's like, again, it really does just feel like everything's designed with this world in mind, and not being too over the top in terms of stuff that shouldn't be here, and arbitrary fetch quests, if you will. It's all stuff that makes sense in terms of how the story works out, which it really does help keep that pace at the right level, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, again, coming back to the writing, there was only maybe one instance or two instances where I felt like, I don't really know how I could utilize this key item to get past this next little milestone objective that I've come to. And then, what did I need to do? Which Jake mentioned when we were chatting, I believe at the end of our interview with him, it was like, oh, you just interact with them again, and then you pay attention to the little clue that you get, which I'd been doing the entire time, obviously, but it really just speaks to the importance of making sure that you're interacting with all of your items, because every time you do, you get a brief little bit of unique dialogue, and it's just a couple of words, but you really do have to read into that. And, that's pretty standard fare for a point and click horror game, or adventure game. But more importantly, I think, again, with the writing, is that it's subtle and it's clever. And if you, pay attention for more than a second, which I clearly didn't in that instance, everything pretty straightforward enough that it doesn't bog down the pacing at all, like you mentioned. And, much like with the Drifter, I'll say the same for Carnival. These are games where the people designing the puzzles, I'm not so concerned with complexity. I'm more concerned with, is it reflective of the world? Does it follow the logic of the world? And does it not feel obtuse, not just from, a difficulty standpoint, but would a normal person such as James Maynard ever think to combine these items in this manner? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, maybe we should go back to the drawing board. And so I think that they've done a good job here. Jake has done a good job of, presenting puzzles that not only don't bog it down, but also James is an investigative reporter. I'm pretty sure he can put two and two together. Now, one aspect of, I think, the overall pacing of the game that I didn't have an issue with, but it's notable that, we naturally got early review copies, and in the final version of the game, James is going to have a ledger that the player can check to go through the different objectives that you have for a given day. Now, in the review build, that wasn't present, but there still is the feature, which will naturally be in the final version, that once each day you go through, when you explore the different environments, you interact with different people and get basically key bits of information. And once you've basically discovered or uncovered all that information in a given day, you get an indicator that says you can go to sleep and make the nighttime progress and pass, and then you can wake up the next day. Which that feature made it so that way I didn't actually feel like I was missing anything in terms of not having a notebook, right? Because I played this in 2 sittings, and you get that brief recap when you wake up. He blatantly states what his intention is for that day and what he needs to do. and then, you go about it. But it was nice to have that feature that I never felt like I was going around in circles looking for a clue when I had already found all of them, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I liked that sort of little indicator that just says, all right, good job, go to sleep, let's progress this. That was kind of a nice little check there. But before we keep unpacking Carnival and what we liked about it and whatnot, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we can dive more into maybe some of the genre elements as well as the pixel art, which, Beyond Boolean's games are well known for at this point. And, there's some additions and changes to that approach here that I think are quite noteworthy. But yeah, we'll have more on that in a moment.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtuo coffee machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your Virtuo pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables. Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
And we're back from our break. And as I was saying before, pixel art is pretty inherent part of Beyond Boolean's games. And while I hadn't played Obsidian, what I was really impressed with in this game was the approach to the individual NPC character art, which are basically these close-ups on them. And those are the most detailed images in the entire game. And what I really liked about that was not only does it reinforce the individuality of each of these characters, but it's one of those things that we've talked about previously with Horror Bites specifically, where, when we find a developer that we like and we start to follow their career and their releases and whatnot, like it's always great when you find a developer that continually and consistently makes entertaining experiences. At the same time, like one thing that I'm always looking for is some type of progression on their part in terms of like what they're bringing with a given experience, right? That doesn't mean to say like every single thing they release has to be drastically different from, what came before it. But I'm always kind of looking to see how a developer is sort of like expanding their toolbox, if you will. How are they expanding on that skill set? Are they trying new genres, new art styles, new music, new emphasis on storytelling? And so for me, what I would say, with Carnival is that it seems as if, Jake has kind of like been expanding a little bit more on the art, whereas the environments are low resolution pixel art. Once again, looks great, but I really was impressed with like those close-up portraits of those characters that not only gives them a bit more personableness, but I think also it just shows, a growth in terms of a skill set, especially with the creature, which we don't have to go too much into towards the end of the game. That's just an absolute horrifying advancement on art style here that I was just a big fan of.
Yeah, and even in scene to scene, like how busy and animated they are. I mean, especially towards the latter half of the game, there are scenes with like plenty of people in, and like all doing different things, different positions, and like it's amazing that it's all kind of happening at once like that. And low res as it is, you get a real sense of what every person is doing, what they're wearing, what they're not wearing, and yeah, it's you get this general sense of like the tone of this place and how things have changed. And yeah, it's all round, I think, the detail has been upped. Like concentrating on what matters. The faces in general play obviously are just blanks with little yappy holes when they're chatting, but it doesn't matter because you get the detail you need. You said those sort of up close shots really sort of accentuate everything, let you know about the characters you need to know, and get a better sense of who they are. And I think once you see certain people in that form, even if you don't see them again, you recognize them in their normal sort of pixel sort of size. So it's a good way of establishing characters that matter. Yeah, and like you said, even then, you just get characters that just crop up. And you're like, oof, like fantastic art all round. But yeah, there's some rooms and environments that are just like so brilliantly detailed, considering it's pixel art as well, and that isn't like it's not mega detailed pixel art, but it really gives an essence of each environment without being showy, I suppose is the best way to put it. It looks hand painted, I suppose, the best way to put it for pixel art people. But yeah, it does harkens back to something a bit more simple in a really complimentary way.
Yeah, I would say that this is one of those examples of why, even if some people, maybe you hear low resolution pixel art, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is like another nostalgia bait kind of like art style approach, which, we've seen plenty of examples of. But like once you actually get into the world of Carnival, you get to see just how richly detailed. I think these environments are actually quite detailed in terms of the utilization of like the color palettes and everything like that. Like from the first moment, once you get off the train station, like that's a bustling station. But then more importantly, like when James makes his way into Venice, like the city proper, and he comes across that, the mannequin out in front of the mask shop, like just those foggy sort of like alleyways of Venetia is one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, this is already this great sense of atmosphere that describe as being, or indicative rather of what most people think of like low resolution pixel art. Like I think there's quite a bit of detail in environments, and they, especially in the especially in the apartment building where he is staying, you go into each floor and each person's room, and that room is indicative of who they are as an individual. And there's lots of little details there. Like if you are chatting with, the apartment owner, basically, he's got this kitchen and he's got this big stone fireplace and he's got, animals hanging from the ceiling and whatnot. Or you go up to the World War I veterans room and, he's got music, he's playing the piano and whatnot. And he's got this balcony, which plays into the game later in a really memorable scene. And then it could just even be an environment that's like out in the open more where, James visits, I think it's like a cafe that's in the city square, basically. And you've got, the fascists in one corner arguing, you sit down to meet with the priest in one, and there's people buying produce and things on another side of it. So it's a good variety of environments that feel, it's very cliched to say they feel lived in. But it's also like the size of the environments I was impressed with as well, especially those outdoor environments. It doesn't feel, I don't know, as claustrophobic maybe as some games, pixel art adventure games do, where it's like, okay, well, I've got this little environment, I need to focus on this. But I think in expanding the world that you get to explore in Carnival, the art gets to, bring that to life in a way that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, the German man remarks early on about Venice being like a forest, like in terms of how it's constructed and how it's built out of the water. And it's like, once you hear that, kind of, it's hard not to notice that, in terms of everything, like that. When you think of folk horror, there's a difference between, like, I suppose what Western ideals might be and what maybe more primitive sort of ideas would be. And there's an aspect of the primitive in how you do come across certain areas, like not just medieval, but like primordial almost in terms of how they're, in terms of what's going on. Yeah, it's just dressed up to look a bit more modern in certain senses. And so, yeah, you do feel like someone who's just, traipsed through heavy jungle to come across like a lost civilization almost at times, and without ever really seeing a tree. And that's like I love that line for that. In terms of how it sort of changes the perspective of everything, and yeah, and again it bleeds through into the design, which is Venice in most cases, so you can't really help that. But yeah, little details about the place, the buildings leaning and stuff like that, really do help to sort of sell it as this very unique place.
Yeah, and I love that it's able to capture that again, mostly for majority of the experience, like devoid of the usual sort of, supernatural happenings that get sprinkled into a lot of folk horror.
Yeah.
For a majority of the experience, at least, that finale, rightfully so, the finale of this game is where a majority of the genre elements are, and that's where it really shines because by the time you get to the end of the game, you're exposed to so much that's so foreign to what a majority of it is that it is a lot more effective, I think. And now, that being said, there are, uh, hesitate to call them jump scares, but there's like one or two scares that play out when you're interacting with characters, and those are used so sparingly, but it makes them more effective because of how sparingly they're used. So it was the type of thing where it's like it's very much about the creepy atmosphere and the sort of trying to uncover what's going on and the mystery of it all. Is predominantly what the experience is, and I think that that again is like indicative of understanding the genre that you're utilizing, which folk horror, I believe, this is the first instance of that for a Beyond Boolin's game. Usually, it's the Lovecraftian side of things, which we chatted about in our.
Yeah, and a bit of historical as well. Like he's done a bit of historical as well. So, but yeah, folk definitely is like the newest part of it, and it being so particular as well. But tying into those things that we've seen before, I suppose, in terms of like theme and time periods and stuff, I like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. One aspect that we didn't chat about outside of his profession and his narcolepsy, um, James has his own sort of, as protagonists in horror often do. He has his own somewhat traumatic past and whatnot. Which I'm curious, like, what did you think about exploring James' background, so almost simultaneously in some instances with uncovering, the secrets of Venice?
I think going back to like this man who's trying to be quite reserved about himself, in a lot of ways, and very matter of fact about his problems, and always diverting, if you will, to the other person, for the job he's in. It makes perfect sense. Like, of course, he's curious. He wants to know about people. So, yeah, it's kind of makes sense as the journey goes on that, it unravels in him, that we find out more, and it all sort of, we get to connect the dots a bit more. And I suppose with what's his problems with narcolepsy and memory as well, it would have been very easy to use that as an excuse, generally for the way he is. But no, I think it does just personality thing, just like, oh, we don't talk about this, we don't talk about that, and like I said, the job is probably the best diversion he could have in that regard. But as you said, it brings it into focus a bit more as a result. So yeah, it was again an interesting approach to sort of handling that, because I don't know, there's many ways it could have been done where I would have been like, yeah, that's a bit, yeah, samey, which, I think given everything else in the game is going in a quite refreshing fashion, it would have been forgivable. But no, again, it's just one of those things that just fits nicely.
Yeah, I have to say for the handling of the narcolepsy, one of those things where I kept assuming like, oh, this is going to be, they're going to use this aspect to try to implicate that, James is basically part of what's going on or something like that, which like wouldn't be terribly surprising because of the fact that we've seen, games and I suppose horror stories in general that have utilized that notion of the unreliable narrator to have maybe a more sinister implication. So the fact that here that's not the case and it's more just like used to basically, I think, communicate to the audience how James himself is feeling, being that stranger in a strange land, it's very disconcerting, I'm sure, for James to wake up in a city square that he's been, apparently 5 hours have passed, but also for the player, it's that moment of like a reset of like, oh, okay, that's strange. What else has transpired in the time that I've been out. And so
Yeah.
that's one of those aspects that I think, again, like you can make, I think I want to say this, like for folk horror specifically, like you can have it so that way not everything is like we're not reacting always to something that's like blatantly in your face horror related or a genre
Mm.
moment or a scare. Right? You can do these different design elements, whether it's a character's backstory or in this case, the narcolepsy plays out in an important way for, not only debasing James's sort of perception of reality at times, but also like reiterating important information, like the card game that I mentioned that he plays, where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I need to remember this thing, so I'm gonna associate an image with it and whatnot. So I liked that was like multi-purposed in utilizing it.
Yeah.
That was one of those aspects that I liked, and yeah, also just like for a game that you're interviewing other people, you have multiple dialogue options, and those dialogue options will allow you to, based on what decisions you make, there's multiple endings for this. So there's
Yeah.
two main endings, I believe, and I think there's a secret one of some sort. But anyways, it's one of those games that I really liked because if it just had one clear kind of like definitive ending, all those choices maybe don't actually matter that much. So the notion that, having some agency and a little bit more importance behind some of the decisions, dialogue or otherwise, you make in this game, yeah, it gives me something to look forward to if I end up going back to replay this. But I will say that there's no point in us really delving into the ending other
No.
than, maybe some generalized statements. But yeah, the ending to this, I think, is quite strong. And it's, I would say this, like, for our previous experience with Jake's games, the ending is indicative of the qualities that we really liked about his horror bites,
Yeah.
right? I think that they're much more genre focused. They're a little bit more in your face. It's the horror money shot, if you will, and it's quite satisfying, I think, for Carnival specifically, and it has a good, well-rounded kind of nature to it that is both shocking, informative, and very fitting.
Yeah. When you were saying about like the multiple ending thing and how that, with the choices and how that, this is a game where I wouldn't have minded, if it was just one ending because everything feels like it's done almost precisely. But I think it'd be kind of more impressive to have two endings that both work. Like that. That's the thing that would matter most. I think there is because of how precise everything is. That's more intriguing, if anything. But yeah, to not have an ending that feels like, oh, this was just like one outcome and something doesn't feel right. No, it still feels right, in terms of like character logic, your own internal logic. And I think point and click, much like visual novels, are direct descendants of books, in so many ways anyway. So then the key to those is that you connect with the protagonist in some way and you are simultaneously living out that story with them and going along and thinking like them a bit more and like that. And good writing will get you there and put you in the shoes, and you won't feel so disconnected then when if you've had that sort of build up all this time with them. Whereas in the other sense, where you have someone who's a bit looser because they've got multiple ending choices and it doesn't really cover all the bases, many people are going to be left sort of shrugging their shoulders going, well, doesn't feel like he should have done that or I would have done that or anything like that. And it's a tricky balance. So that's always going to be difficult to pull off two endings, anyway. But even if you pull off one in a game like this, I think it matters.
Yeah, and I think that furthermore, to have two endings, and naturally, I've only had one of them, but like, I think the writing here is indicative of if we were going to be getting two endings from a Beyond Booleans game, more often than not, that's probably going to be a justified inclusion rather than the thing of just like, how many games do you see released on Steam and it's like 5 endings? It's like, okay, well, I don't know that that's necessarily always in service of, a story or if that's more in service of like the Steam page marketing, if you will. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we only recently talked about Heavy Rain, and
Mhm.
that's got endings that just feel ludicrous, in
Yeah.
terms of like, and it just feels like choice for the sake of choice. It's, I think he did mention about, choose your own adventure books, some being
Mm.
in there a bit, and I think some of those, the problem you have with them is like they're quite vague and broad stroke stuff in terms of like how you get the outcomes, and so it still doesn't feel as freeing as it should to have so many different outcomes, because how could it? You have to have like ridiculously complex systems to make lots of different choices matter. Like Baldur's Gate 3 kind of level stuff at least. To really like make all these different branching paths work. But this is streamlining it down to a couple. It is perfectly acceptable, I think.
Honestly, I think also having too many endings is maybe indicative of a lack of confidence in writing. Like having
Yeah.
some, I'm not talking about two, I'm talking about a game where there's like five or six, because it's like the need to feel like you're covering every potential basis or outcome. Whereas something that is a little bit more refined in terms of its endings, if there's like two or maybe three, like
Yeah.
that feels a little bit more confident to me than, and avoiding the situation where you have all these endings and three-fourths of them are completely ludicrous. And you're like, well, what is even the purpose of this? But sort of one of the last things I just wanted to say before we sort of wrap up was that we briefly chatted about the other person that's involved in Carnival.
Yeah.
While Jake is a one-man development team with Beyond Boulins, this time around, the score was done by the composer for this game. I believe it's his name is Bernard. And I will be sure to try to link any of his work I can find below this episode. But the score in this, I think, is really terrific as well. It nails a really great atmosphere in terms of like folk horror, but at the same time, it does a lot of the heavy lifting for just like making you feel like something's off, not so blatant that you're like, oh, this is really, really chilling music, but it's something that is just slightly off that it makes even the most innocuous seeming of interactions with an environment or, another character.
Yeah.
It's kind of just captures that aspect of folk horror that is always so effective, and that it's like, well, I haven't been shown enough that I am going to like jettison out of here for fear of my life, but that's noteworthy because it's odd, and like the way that that score is able to kind of like capture that, I thought was a great compliment overall to just how the atmosphere in this game has captured the elements of folk horror that we love so much.
Yeah. Again, I think it's something that feeds into the curiosity aspect of everything. There's a slight curious thing to it, in
Mm.
terms of, if you could put it as a sound, it does just elicit that for me. It gives you that sort of idea of a playful sort of thing.
Mm.
Like, yeah, come on, like that. But because if you just slightly alter that tone, it does kind of feel a bit discordant and a bit
Mm.
off, but still weirdly comforting. So
Yeah.
that's great to see someone sort of get the idea and the feel of a game, and its tone, and complement it well with the soundtrack. The thing I suppose I'll mention is like the obvious thing people might come into this with this is being Venice is, and a horror game is Don't Look Now, with the
Mhm.
Nicholas Rogue film, because believe me, that was the first thing I looked at and went, oh, cool, excellent, because that's a fucking brilliant location for that film,
Mm.
and the thing it does. But it's a very different film to this
Yeah.
game, in terms like the thematically, and just like in what they do. But they do sort of carry across a lot of the same things here in terms of like the unease, the slightly surreal but yet beautiful sort of nature of Venice as well. Obviously, two different time periods, but yeah, that the use of sort of folklore, fairy tales, and history like that are put into the game, I always find quite fascinating to see this little sort of obscure tidbits from different places and getting them utilized in a horror story. And yeah, anything that does that and puts a spin on it that's not the usual is always refreshing. So yeah, this was a treat in that regard. As I said off air to Jake last week, it's extremely much shit when you get these things together.
Yeah, and I think furthermore, it has solidified that I don't think we're going to be done covering point and click horror games anytime soon, because I feel like the more that we've kind of just like explored all that genre has to offer, very recently, we keep finding games, both horror bites and, full releases that I think just continually are either pushing the mechanics of the genre into a more modernized direction, or, something such as Carnival, which is revisiting the work of a developer that is now tackling a new subgenre and seeing how their skill set is growing in tackling that new subgenre, but at the same time, like refining what makes their games so enjoyable, and why, we've going to keep an eye out for, Jake's next game project and whatnot. He mentioned he's developing we would consider like a horror bite, a shorter horror experience called Snarl, that he's looking to release at some point later this year. But yeah, for people that are interested in checking out Carnival, this game is released as of now. This is going to be on Steam. And yeah, you should also check out, Beyond Boolin's other games that are on Steam, and as well as his horror bites that are on itch. That would be Teeth of Glass, which was, I believe, one of, if not our favorite horror bite of the year that we covered it. And then we both quite enjoyed The Anchorite, which is also on itch. So yeah, it was great getting to not only chat with Jake and get some more insight into like his approach to game design and storytelling in games, and naturally getting to see a developer that we learned about through a horror bite have this full-fledged release, and see how those talents grow and whatnot. But yeah, that's going to do it for our chat on Carnival. And as always, my friend, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Okay, you're my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Safe Room. If you enjoy the show, please rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter and Blue Sky at Safe Room Pod for show updates. As always, our main episodes of Safe Room drop every Monday, but our bite-sized episodes of Horror Bites, our indie horror showcase, drop every Thursday. You can follow the Horror Bites Twitter account at horrorbites_SR. You can join our Discord channel, Safe Room Podcast, to chat with us and other horror fans about the genre we all love. And finally, you can send emails to saferoompod@gmail.com if you'd like to share your thoughts on a game we have or are going to cover. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth, the official podcast. Each week, host Adam Rogers is joined by guests, including the show's creator, cast, and crew, in this exclusive companion podcast. They will explore story elements, deep dive into character motivations, and offer an episode-by-episode behind-the-scenes breakdown of each terrifying chapter in this new series. Search FX's Alien Earth wherever you listen to podcasts.